support specialist, and a principal. And so happy to be in Thailand. This is like my dream place to live, so I'm sort of living the dream right now. So today we're going to talk about how we identify and address learning challenges. So when students present at school, whether it be CMIS or any school, we don't know exactly how this student is going to learn or what their learning styles are. So we identify that, and once we identify that, we create a program or plan that accommodates and tailored for that student. But students will come a lot of times with disabilities. They may be mild disabilities, they may be, some that are more intense. So we don't know that until we get a chance to spend time with the student. This presentation will give you sort of an overview of learning challenges, autism, learning disabilities. Under the umbrella of learning disabilities, you have dyslexia, which is the more popular one, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, all right? We also have ADHD, which is attention deficit. So we have attention deficit, and we have attention deficit hyperactivity, all right? One, a child is more subdued. The other, the child is hyperactive. But in both cases, they disengage. And so it's coming up with strategies to get them engaged. So we'll go through. So this is a learning disabilities, a disorder, basic psychological processes that basically impact the way students learn, the way they process language, the way they process information. So when you have a disability, a student or an individual without a disability will take in information, and they take in information and they process it, and automatically. A student with a disability, they take in information and it sits there, and they have to figure out how to process it. So when you have students with learning disabilities and they have problems with comprehension, you read fluently, but then an individual without a disability, a learning disability, they can read information and process it automatically as they read it. A student with a disability would have to read information, and then they forget what they read, and they have to read it again and again and again. And so that negatively impacts their learning, their ability to participate in school. So these are some of the things that go along with a lot of the disabilities, whether it be autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, is the engagement and the ability to process information. So here's some famous people that you probably didn't know that had learning disabilities. Albert Einstein couldn't read until he was 9. Whoopi Goldberg had dyslexia, so did Steve Jobs. Also, an individual, very well-known individual, Walt Disney, had a learning disability. And so these are all people that overcame learning disabilities to be successful. I had a learning disability, and I hated school because of it, because I would be assigned passages to read for homework, and I would read them in a passage that it would take my peers 30 minutes to read and respond to. It would take me 2 hours. And I couldn't figure out why, but nobody knew. And so I sort of slid under the radar. And it wasn't until I became a special ed teacher years later that I reflected back and said, that was me. I had that disability, but nobody identified it, so I had to work even harder. So here are types of exceptionalities. We have dyslexia, which is reading disabilities, dysgraphia, writing, dyscalculia, and math, and then autism, which is a developmental disorder, and sometimes autism will encompass all of those, okay? So a student with autism, most kids with autism have fine motor deficits. They have low muscle tone. So writing is a challenge for them. A lot of them have ADHD, and so attending, engaging becomes challenging for them. And so whenever you have those type of processing deficits, kids will sit in a room and they hear information coming in they don't know exactly how to process it, how to attack it, or address it. And so these are things, and then eventually what happens is students will then disengage. And so students, specifically with ADHD, they'll disengage, and then eventually it turns into depression. And why does it turn into depression? Because they haven't had any success with school. And their social life struggles suffers as well. So that's where the depression comes in, untreated. So, dyslexia, challenges with precise and fluent word recognition, and adequate spelling. So, I grew up, as probably many of you grew up and you had these weekly spelling tests. All right, so you get these vocabulary words. Okay, you're going to be tested on those words on Friday. All right, and that student with dyslexia, I could tell you had severe anxiety because it's how am I going to address this? How am I going to prepare for the spelling test? And so they see their peers spelling with automaticity. They go through, they study words, they write it, it's fine. But the student with dyslexia can't figure out why they're having the challenges with spelling. So with those students, you have to provide accommodations and sometimes modifications. All right, and modifications may be one of the modifications that I would use with students. If it's a 6-letter word that needs to be spelled, I would omit 3 of the words, and that would be their spelling test. So I would do that for all the words. So all they had to do is do what they call a close process. So figure out the words, the letters that go in to complete the word. With word processors and computers and all that, spelling is not as huge of an issue as it most was, because you got spell check and all these other things that help people spelling. So it's what I encourage teachers, if their students with dyslexia, processing deficit, don't give them a spelling test. Or if you do give them a spelling test, let us modify, in the SST department, let us modify the test for them so that they still take the test, but it's on a modified. And that's the way we accommodate them. So in order to be able to read, you have to focus attention. Remember, I told you earlier, students will disengage. And so by the disengaging, they don't get the information, or they get it in pieces. So I'm engaged now, so I got some of the information, now I disengage, now I re-engage, and I get a little more, and so it's in chunks, and it's not as fluid. Build ideas and images, compare new ideas to what they already know, store ideas in memory, recognize sounds associated with letters, words and grammar. All these things transfer into writing, because if you can't read, you're going to have challenges with writing, right? And so reading is decoding, writing is encoding, so they both go together. So approximately 10% of elementary students struggle with reading disability. And so when you look at reading at the foundational level, you have phonics or phonemic awareness, and that's the ability to dissect and understand sounds. And then you have whole language. Whole language is less phonetic than the phonics levels. My children were educated in Northern Virginia, and so the school they attended, where I first started my teaching career, was a whole language-based school. And so they didn't learn to read phonetically. But I had students on my caseload who did not have the phonics foundation, and these were 5th grade students reading on the 1st grade level. And I couldn't figure out, how did they miss all of that instruction? Well, they never had it. And if you're in a whole language school, there's not a big push on phonics. And so, but some students need phonics because they have the processing deficit. And you remember the last slide said they have to be able to understand sounds and how sounds correspond with letters. So here's some strategies for dyslexia. Quiet space. That helps with the distractions. Student with disability, easily distracted. Easily distracted. Audio books. Why audio books? Because I don't have to read, I don't have to focus on reading and comprehending. I can listen to the information and I can create a visual image of what the story is telling me. Copy of lecture notes, which is a big one because you put notes on the board, students has to transfer. They have to look up, read, and then transfer. And there are things that are missed. So one of the strategies, one of the accommodations that I've done in the past is have a teacher, when you make your notes, make a copy, and we'll give the copy to the student. Or create a peer tutor or peer buddy for that student, and as that student is taking notes, make a copy of that student's notes. As I mentioned earlier, don't grade spelling. You know, if I know that a spelling test is coming up, and I know not that I didn't prepare, but I didn't prepare appropriately or adequately, then it's going to raise my anxiety level. Because now you have a student from September to June, every Friday, their anxiety level is high because I have to take a spelling test, and I don't know how to prepare for it. Chunk years is smaller units. If there's a test or reading passage that a student needs to read, and it's a full page, I cut it into thirds. It's okay, read this first, then this, and then this. And then we have a conversation about the first passage, the first part of the passage, then we have a conversation about the second and then the third. That's my way of testing their comprehension to make sure they understand. Dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is a learning disability that affects writing abilities. It can manifest itself as difficulties with spelling, poor handwriting, trouble putting thoughts on paper, as students may demonstrate. Whenever you see a student, we call it writer's block. Whenever you see a student and there's a writing assignment and you give the assignment and 15 minutes later you go and you walk past their desk and there's nothing on the page, it's not so much a writer's block, okay? It's they don't understand what it is they're supposed to write, okay? And so we have to come up sometimes with sentence starters, right, to get you started. I would sit down with my students in a small group and say, what do you want to write about? Well, I want to write a story about whatever. Okay, let's get you started. And so when you have dysgraphia, when students have dysgraphia, they're so concerned with syntax errors. They're so concerned with, am I going to have the right spelling? Am I going to capitalize? Am I going to have the right punctuation? And so all of these things are coming at them at one time, and it says, you know what, I can't do this, so they shut down. And so you have to be able to push them and say, okay, let's get the first couple of sentences written, and then I'm going to come back and check on it. And then I'll leave you over with another student and I'll come back. And I said, don't worry about spelling. I want you to just free write. Write what's in your head. And sometimes that's even challenging. And so in those cases, it's audio. I give them a recorder. I said, what your story, the story that you want to write, you speak it. Speak it into a recorder. Because now I've taken away the barrier. I've taken away that barrier. So now they record it. We'll play it back, stop it. Okay, now you're right. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about spelling. Just write. Write it how it's spelled, the way it sounds. Because, and I've shared this with teachers. A teacher came to me a few years ago and said, you know, the student has a lot to say. They have a lot that they want to communicate, but the spelling is horrible. Punctuation. So I said, okay. And I said, is this during writing class? And yeah, because if it's in social studies or science or content, then I understand your concern. But I said, is this during writing block? Yes, during writing block. It's okay. I said, now, in writing block, when you write, there's a writing process, right? Well, yeah. Okay, so if there's a writing process, if my memory recalls correctly, part of the writing process is an editing stage, right? So, well, yeah. So should that be addressed during the editing stage? That student shouldn't produce a perfect writing sample on the first run. You have to go through. Even great writers don't just sit down and type and don't have to go through and edit, okay? So I said, go through the writing process. The writing process is there for a reason. For those students who struggle with spelling and punctuation, have them write, and then you assist them, support them through the editing stage of writing. Now they have a perfect product. And now that takes away some of their anxiety, because now they say, you know what, I'm going to write, but you know what, I can just free write now because I'm going to have that editing stage that I can fix anything that's wrong. So those are things, and this is really just good teaching, right? So, type out with pencil grip, illegible handwriting. For students who have illegible handwriting, what I've done, there are two devices that I've used in the past. One is called a Neo, N-E-O, and one's called Alpha Smart. And all they are just word processors. I just have students type their information in there, it corrects the spelling for them, and they come up with a product. I want to measure or assess what's in here, what you're trying to tell me, what you're trying to communicate, not so much how you did it. So, unfinished, omitted words and sentences, difficulty organizing thoughts on paper, difficulty in syntax structure, the grammar I mentioned earlier, organizing thoughts, graphic organizers, all right, graphic organizers. I attended a workshop with Learning Focused Schools, and Learning Focused Schools was created by Max Thompson, Dr. Max Thompson. And during one of the presentations, a teacher asked Dr. Thompson, so how often should I use graphic organizers? And Max, he took a second, he said, how often? He said, whenever you want students to learn. And that basically said it all, you know? So let's just say this is not a student with a disability. We should be teaching graphic organizers anyway. That's just good teaching. And some of the workshops that we're doing here now on differentiated instruction, all of those things are being incorporated into daily teaching practices. When teachers do lesson plans, they are accommodating students with learning differences. Okay? We don't all learn the same way. Right? We don't all take in information and process it in the same manner. You know, when I lived in Beijing, I remember going to my first restaurant. And I go into the restaurant and I'm starving. I mean, I'm famished. And so I go in a restaurant and I point to a menu and I want to get a menu. So I was given a menu, and the menu was in all Mandarin, no English, no pictures. So I couldn't place an order. Whereas if there was someone with me who spoke Mandarin, read Mandarin, they could. All right? So that's reaching one population, one student, one individual. I go to the next restaurant. It's in Mandarin, but they're pictures. So now I can place an order because I can point and say, yeah, I want this here. So understanding how we act, how we understand and we take the information. And what it basically boils down to is two things: equity and access. Students can't learn if they can't access the information. Here's some strategies for dysgraphia. Use of computers. I mentioned the Alpha Smart and the Neo, word processors. Computers become word processors, oral exams. You know, as I mentioned before, I want to know what's here. Tell me what you know. If writing it is going to become an impediment, I don't want that. Because now I can't assess what you really know. Tell me. I give you an oral exam. Recording lectures. Alternative writing assignments. pencil grips with days. A lot of students, occupational therapists will provide those to accommodate students with pencil grip challenges. Reduced copying required. That was one of the things that we mentioned before with dyslexia. Have the notes photocopied, and have the student give the student a copy of those photocopied notes, or a peer who takes really good notes, photocopy their notes for that student. Dyscalculia. Now we get into math. Now, dyscalculia is probably one of the most challenging because you're dealing with the processing piece. We were talking about the processing deficit. So now we're trying to process math problems, numbers, but we're also trying to process word problems with comprehension. So now I can't solve the math portion of the problem because I can't comprehend the written part of what it's asking me to do. How does it affect math learning? Understanding and doing word problems. I just mentioned sequencing information in events and understanding concepts related to times such as days, season, etc. Organizing problems on a page and keeping numbers lined up. I've used graph paper for students when they do math problems. Graph paper keeps them organized because of the lines. And so when you have a student with dyscalculia, those are going to be so beneficial for them. And as a strategy, young students with dyscalculia that we work with, we want them to become self-advocate. And so by incorporating these strategies and teaching them these strategies, they become self-advocate. So that third grader that learned how to learn these strategies of how to address their disability, when they become fifth graders, they can say to their teacher, hey, I need graph paper. Hey, you know what? There's a thing called, they probably can't recall, you know, with the blocks and everything, manipulatives. I need those. Can you supply those? Because now they're taking control of their own learning. And some strategies. Scratch paper, using fingers. Manipulatives, like what I mentioned earlier. Okay? It could be the space 10 blocks, it could be cubes, jump cubes, diagrams to draw information, draw pictures of the word problem. Mnemonic devices. The first mnemonic device I learned, and many of you probably learned, was PEMDAS. When you have to solve a problem that's in parentheses, what to do first. And so that's known as a mnemonic device. Rhythms, music. I had students with math challenges, and we're learning math facts with a tennis ball because it's a kinesthetic way of learning. So as they're bouncing the ball, they're skip counting. 2, 4, 6. And so the kinesthetic manner of it is ingraining, is teaching them those concepts. Autism. It's a neurological disorder. There's no cure for autism. And there's several reasons. People have theories about autism. I did research, my doctoral research on autism, and their theories about autism. High levels of mercury in the blood. There was a study that came out, or an article that came out, a lot of information came out back in the late 90s about vaccinations. If you got your child vaccinated before the age of 3, that the likelihood was higher that they would contract autism. There's just enough data to disprove the data to prove facts about autism. With the CDC came out and said, yeah, you know, there's not enough research There's not enough information that says that vaccines cause autism. But what they did say is, or did agree to, is the amount of mercury in the vaccines could possibly cause. Now, does it mean that they put mercury in there as an ingredient in their vaccines? No. But the vaccines were preserved in a chemical called the myrisol. The myrisol has trace amounts of mercury. So that created another theory. Well, that's why, because of the myrisol. Still don't know if that's true or not, but I know that the CDC went on record to say that they no longer use the myrisol as a preservative for vaccines. Signs and symptoms, difficulty communicating. Individuals with autism, when if they are in a social setting or social opportunities, they don't make eye contact. So if they look at you, one of the things I would teach my kids, my students on the spectrum, is I would say when you go in and introduce yourself to someone, look at their forehead, because they can't make any eye contact. So look at their forehead, and I would say not to be a space invader. So your arm, your forearm, I said, when you extend your hand, keep a forearm distance between you and the person. Don't do this, like this, And so these are things that they just don't recognize. And so AU means to be alone or to oneself. And so students with autism, they like to do things on their own. If I would do an evaluation, I did in-home therapies for birth to 3, kids birth to 3. And when I would go in, automatically, this is my first visit with the student, automatically, I see the child playing by themselves, and I would say, okay, this is, I have some concerns. They would not engage me, they would not engage their family, their parents. They would only engage with toys. And so that was a red flag to me. Spectrum, because it's a wide variety. You have autism on one end, which is the more severe end, and then you have Asperger's. Asperger's is a higher functioning form of autism. You have Rett syndrome, which is more prevalent with girls, Fragile X. PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder, none other specified. That's more of the generic label of autism. PDD-NOS. A lot of school districts, because autism really doesn't manifest to age 3 or beyond age 3. So what a lot of school districts have started to do is they come up with a label, and the label is SDD, and that's significant developmental delay. Now, a student who has a suspected disability of autism or diagnosis or label of autism, they will carry that until age 9, because by age 9, we know if it's autism or if it's not. And so they'll carry that label till age 9, and then if it's determined that it is autism, then the label changes from SDD to AU, autism. If it's not, it may change to OHI, which is other health impairment. But other health impairment comes with the diagnosis. It has to come with a medical diagnosis or the evaluation from a psychologist. Students here at CMIS, if a parent says, hey, my child has ADHD, okay, do you have a diagnosis? Because with a diagnosis, we can then create accommodations for that student to support. The restrictive and repetitive behaviors, they're very much routine oriented. My students with autism, when I taught, if I was not going to be at school the next day, I would tell them the day before. I would say, I won't be here tomorrow. I'm going to be absent but there's going to be a substitute. And if I could identify the substitute in advance, I would just have a picture and I would say, this person is going to be here tomorrow. Why? Because if I don't, or if I did not tell them that, they would come to school the following day, and if they didn't see Mr. Ira, they would have a meltdown. Because they are so routine oriented. And I need to, I'm going to school, my school is still there, I'm going to get on my bus, this is my bus is still there, the bus is going to take me to school, I'm going to go to school, and then once I get to school, I'm going to see Mr. Ira. But when I got to class, I didn't see Mr. Ira. So now my world is turned upside down. But now, since I told them in advance, now I know that Mr. Ira is not going to be here today. He told me yesterday he's not going to be here, but Mr. So-and-so is going to be here tomorrow. And then so we go through those same steps of the bus, school, classroom. I'm expecting you to be here today, not Mr. Ira. So, and visual, everything has to be visual. I can't say Mr. Thompson is going to be here tomorrow. I need to say Mr. Thompson is going to be here tomorrow, and here's a picture of Mr. Thompson. Sounds that they make. When you see a student, an individual with autism, and you see the flapping of the hands, that's called stimming. S-T-I-M-M-I-N-G, stimming. And stimming is basically self-stimulation. When they get excited, whether it be listening to a song, watching a train go by, whatever it is, they do this, and that's their way of that sensory input. That's the way they get that sensory input. Echolalia. If I say, Ira, how are you today? Ira, how are you today? That's the response. John, did you have lunch yet? John, did you have lunch yet? Ira, did you go for recess? Did you go for recess? I had one student, 4th grade student. Over the summer, he had basically grown a fascination with Britney Spears and the song Womanizer, to the point to where he came to school and all day long he sang Womanizer, 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 Womanizer. So I said, okay, I understand you like the song, fine, whatever, but you can't sing it in school. He didn't know that. So, Womanizer, Womanizer. So he would work, but we would give him breaks in between his work. And so his break, the break that he wanted was computer. So he would go on the computer, but we had to monitor. He had an assistant. We had to monitor the content. So he would go onto the website, and he was very bright, very bright. But he'd go onto the computer, and the assistant would get him onto the computer, and he'd be on a game, and play the game. So the assistant would turn his back for 5 minutes, wherever he'd go back. He's playing Womanizer video on the computer. And so it's more reinforcing that. And of course he gets off the computer, it's Womanizer, Womanizer. And so what I did was, he liked to sing. So a lot of you probably old enough to remember Schoolhouse Rock. So I played Schoolhouse Rock for him. And so with Schoolhouse Rock, I'm a Bill, just only a Bill. So I played this for him. That replaced the Womanizer. And then eventually it extinguished. Risk factors, having a sibling. There are cases, I've had twins, both on the spectrum, one more Asperger's, the other more autistic. And so there are some students who have siblings who are not on the spectrum, and there are some that have both students on the spectrum. Dr. Shore, Stephen Shore, who is on the spectrum, I met him at a conference years ago, and he was a very interesting man. And so before his presentation, I didn't think he was presenting, I thought he was making it. Because he was walking around and he had a ball cap, it was a ball cap with an extended beard. So he's walking around, and he's looking around, and the lights are really low. So then he gets up and he's presenting, and he said he was diagnosed with autism as a child. He said, I'm hypersensitive to light, which is why he wore the ball cap along the meeting, because it blocks out the light. And so what his theory, when he would meet with families, and families would come in and bring their child and say, hey, my child has autism, has a diagnosis of autism, he would say, turn to dad and say, congratulations, Dad, you have autism too. And what he was saying was it was genetically passed down. So genetic chromosome conditions, being born of older parent, 1 in 100. When I did my research back for my dissertation back in 2004, it was 1 in 500. In 2004, 1 in 500. Now it's 1 in 100. Why? More kids autistic? It's more awareness. Prior to that, you didn't see any type of literature in pediatric offices. You didn't see a lot of commercials. You didn't see a lot of these organizations, Autism Speak. You didn't have a lot of that, so the awareness wasn't there. We just know we had these kids that were enrolled in school, and they exhibited these behaviors, and we didn't know anything how to address those behaviors. And when parents would come to me, when I did this as a consultant, parents would come to my office and say, Dr. Hi, I understand you specialize in working with kids with autism. My child has autism. What are we going to do? I said, okay. I said, tell me the characteristics. Well, did you just hear me? My child has autism. What do you do? I can't do anything. That's no cure. I can't give your child a pill and cure it. What I want to know is what are the characteristics? What are the things that we want to address? Identifying and addressing, what are the things we want to address? Because I'm more concerned with the behaviors, not the diagnosis. We know the diagnosis we can do nothing about. But what are the behaviors? Those are the things we're going to address. Are they aggressive? Okay, let's work on aggressive behaviors. Do they have meltdowns? Are they social emotional challenges? Let's work on those. Do we have any learning challenges? Let's identify and address those. Do we have problems with self-regulation? Let's identify and address those. Because now we have a child, an individual with autism, who seems normal. A couple of things I mentioned: the robotic, singing the songs, robotic. Hi, my name is Ira. What's your name? That's the way they learn. That's the way they learn, and they process, and they demonstrate what they learn. Visual schedules. I've set up visual schedules for kids with autism because they need the visuals to transition. So the first 4 weeks of school, I set up a visual schedule for them, a whole class schedule, and an individualized schedule. And they have to go, they have to peel, okay, first thing is breakfast. Okay, breakfast is over. Let's peel it off, put it aside. What's next? Story time. Okay, so now I need to go sit for story time. Once that's over, we'll peel it off. That goes on for about 4 weeks. After that, it's ingrained. They know their schedule. And they don't need the visual schedule. I remember taking over a preschool classroom in San Diego, and most of my, it was a special ed classroom, but most of my kids are autistic. And so, because I had some experience, my same formula for working with kids with autism was to set up a visual schedule. So I had 6 kids in my classroom, all with autism. So I had spent all this time making little icons, Velcro, put their names and their pictures at the top, had them all set up, and after the second week, they left, and all of their schedules were still intact. And I was frustrated. I said, oh man. And I said this to one of my assistants, and I said, I didn't remind them of using schedule today. And my sister said, because maybe they don't need it anymore. And that was a learning experience for me. You know, because I had this formula. You got to do it for 4 weeks. Maybe that's part of my autism. It's got to be 4 weeks. Can't be 3, can't be 5. It's got to be 4 weeks. And so that was as I said, a learning experience for me, and they didn't need it. You know. So they're very being more sensitive, less sensitive to light and noise. I mentioned Dr. Shore. Overly focused on interests such as moving objects. You will normally see a child on the spectrum with a car, and they're rolling the car, but they're not only rolling the car, they're watching the wheels move. They love the way the wheels turn. And some kids will do that. They will watch the wheels turn, and then it's still. I think maybe about 6 years ago, I witnessed an adult and a child. The child was probably about 9 or 10, and the adult was her father. And they were at a train station. And it wasn't a train station of transporting, it was just more it was like a museum. And they were standing there, and the daughters, the father's talking to the daughter and everything, and from afar, they looked normal. Everything looked normal. The train passes, and the father starts to do this. And the daughter's like, "Do you like that, Dad? Do you like that, Dad?" And he's just snipping, and I'm like, wow, you know, to see an adult like that. But then to see the daughter not think it's strange. Say, "Oh, you like the train, Dad? You like the train?" And he's just standing there. You know? So, getting upset by the slight changes in routine, I mentioned that. You have to make sure that they're routine oriented. They're very routine oriented. Make sure that they stay on schedule. I've had a student who, we have PE at 10 o'clock, and it's on schedule. At 9:59, at 9:58, Dr. Ira, we have PE in 2 minutes. Okay, all right. 9:59, Dr. Ira, we have PE in 1 minute. 10 o'clock, it's time to go to PE. But they're very regimented, very routine oriented. That's just the way their brains work. A lot of them will have dietary, they're very particular about what they eat. They a lot of times eat a lot of starchy foods because that's what they are interested in. That's what they enjoy. But they also have also have digestive issues because of their diets. The echolalia, that's what I mentioned earlier about the repeating of the words. It's called echolalia. It's just like echo. And that's what we say, oh, it's echo. Diagnosis generally requires 2 years old, doing a well baby checkup. There's no specific way of identifying and diagnosing autism. It's more family history and observation by neurologists or developmental pediatrician. Labels only by the 3rd birthday. You know, as I mentioned before, once we get a label, you have a diagnosis and you have a label. A label is more educational, a diagnosis is more medical. So in the field of education, we have, or disabilities, we have medical model and an educational model. So if a parent comes to me and says, "Hey, my child has a diagnosis of autism, I need you to put together an IEP." Well, it's not that simple. That's a medical diagnosis. We have to do an educational evaluation to make sure that it is, in fact, autism. We've had kids who've had diagnosis of autism, but they didn't qualify with the label of autism under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They didn't qualify because they didn't meet the criteria. Have diagnosis, they didn't meet the criteria. And so in those cases, we may put a label, give them a label of OHI, other health impairment, because they still need the support. It just didn't qualify throughout the evaluation process. Treatments and intervention, chelation detox. This is where kids go to a doctor and they have an IV, and what they do is they take out the bad blood and they infuse or transfuse good blood, because theoretically there's high levels of mercury in the blood, which is causing autism. So if they can get the bad blood out and put the clean blood in, then that's going to help. I can tell you kids don't like it. I personally just think it's a cool thing to do to a child. I had a first grade student, actually a kindergarten student, who would go once a week to get a chelation therapy, and he would come back to school and he was just dying of it. But it is an option that's being used now as a detox. Hyperbaric oxygen machine. Medication not so much for the autism, but for the characteristics. Because I have autism, but also hyperactive, so we'll take medication to address the hyperactivity. Maybe I have autism, but I'm depressed, so we'll take medication to address those. So what it does is it essentially masks ABA, speech and language, discrete trials. Discrete trials are essentially, they're very regimented, and if I'm doing discrete trials with a student, and I want the student to touch the cell phone. Touch the cell phone. I'm going to put the cell phone in the thermos here. All right, touch the cell phone, and then just look, just say, "I don't want the cell phone." All right. Touch the cell phone. Good job, good job. Touch the cell phone. All right. Touch the cell phone. And then touch this. Oh, touch the cell phone. Those are discrete trials. But you do it with colors, you do it with numbers, you do it with shapes at an early age. Those are discrete trials. The problem with discrete trials in ABA is sometimes kids have a problem with transferring over to the school, So I learned this in isolation, one-on-one. But then once I got in the classroom, I couldn't do it. And so that's one of the problems that I have with the ABA discrete trials. When you have severe students who are severely autistic, discrete trials are good because it helps with just daily life functions. But as far as learning, I don't really look at it as a viable option. But it does work. Speech and language is more for articulation, because a lot of students have language delays. Sometimes language delay and autism go hand in hand. A student may have a language delay and you think automatically that they are autistic, but no, they just have a language delay. And so speech and language pathologists will address the language delay, but also address the pragmatic skills, which is basically how to read, how to socialize with others, how to make a friend, how to keep a friend, how to be a friend. That's what the speech and language will do. Visual schedules I mentioned, because they need the visual schedule for transition. And so those are really good for students in the spectrum. ADHD and ADD makes it difficult for an individual to pay attention. Impulsive behaviors, restless, or constantly active. And again, as I mentioned, ADHD untreated can turn to depression. And part of it is because they feel like outcasts, academically and socially. Socially, I do inappropriate things, so I can't make friends. Academically, I can't stay engaged, so my grades suffer. So I have nothing positive going on. Now, what they love are video games. Why? Because video games are not as challenging as making friendships, but they're also engaging. They're very active. They're very active. So a kid with ADHD may experience that. When I did early intervention, I would go to homes and work with children working free, and I would see activity, a lot of activity going on in the home. I would see television on, the radio on, Legos here, the iPads going here, blocks here, cars and trucks here. And I would see, just watch the kid. They would go to the iPad, they play for 2 minutes, put the iPad down, they watch TV, leave the TV, they go to the block Legos, they build the Legos, they do that for maybe 10, 15 minutes, they leave that, they go to the cars. And what I said to, it's what I would always say to the families, you're creating a hyperactive or attention deficit child. Because they can't focus on one thing because they have so many things. You guys ever been to Las Vegas? You see all the lights, you don't know where you want to go. You're like, oh, yeah, I want to go there, but I really want to go there. That's what that looks like. And so what happens is, these are kids below the age of 3, so they haven't started school yet. So guess what happens when they go to school? And they're in preschool, and they go in there, and they go to the blocks, and they dump all the blocks out, they play for a while, they leave them there, and then they go to this, because that's what they're used to. That's what they're used to. Could be genetic, low birth weight, brain injury. Some students with TBI, traumatic brain injury, will exhibit attention deficit disorder characteristics because of the injury. I've had one student in my career with TBI, and he was very easily to disengage. Wasn't so much hyperactive, but just easy to disengage. Again, toxins, cigarette smoking, alcohol use, drug use during pregnancy. Those are all factors. Adderall, Ritalin as the most common medications because they stimulate the neurotransmitters. They help to engage, help students to stay focused, stay engaged. There's so many adults with ADHD, undiagnosed, and that adults, and it's like, gosh, I can't focus. And here's the thing. There's no such thing as multitasking. We say we multitask. Yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing it. No, you're not. You focus on one thing. But people who suffer or have the diagnosis of ADHD will say, I'm multitasking. Now, multitasking as far as I'm going to delegate this to this person, I'm going to delegate this to this person, I'm going to do this. That's multitasking. I have 3 tasks to do, and I'm going to give the task. But if I'm doing 3 things, do you think I'm going to give 100% focus and detail to all 3 things if I'm doing 3 things at one time? It's like the person that's cooking. They're cooking, they're watching television, and maybe they're doing laundry at the same time. Maybe the food is burning because I'm so engaged in what's going on the television. The clothes haven't been folded yet because I'm focusing on television and because those are engaging. The laundry's not engaging. Any questions?
executive functioning disorder?
What's that?
Executive functioning disorder.
Yes. So executive function goes with self-regulation. Self-regulation is the inability, or challenge with self-regulation is the inability to prepare for life's challenges. So one of the ways we do that is we plan. We have a schedule. I have several students now with executive functioning challenges, and I meet with them. And they say, you know what, I have homework, and homework is overwhelming, and I'm not going to be able to turn it in time. And I said, well, have you had that problem before? Well, no, I haven't had that problem before, but I know it's going to come. We're not going to address it. We're not going to discuss it if it hasn't happened. But it's been able to prepare for life's challenges. Executive functioning is basically, how do I go through my day? How do I sit? How am I prepared for writing? How am I prepared for physical education? How am I prepared for lunch? Those are all your executive functioning components. And self-regulation and executive functioning go hand in hand. Some students need sensory input prior to starting their day. And it could be climbing a rock wall, it could be walking a maze. They need those things in order to regulate, self-regulate.
So do you think procrastination is also a symptom of functioning, executive functioning
Yes.
disorder? Procrastination.
Yes. I think procrastination is, and I'll tell you why. We procrastinate things that's a non-preferred activity or non-preferred task. That's what we procrastinate. If I know, I work out every morning, and I meditate. So I meditate, yoga, and exercise in the morning. And the least favorite thing of those three is the exercise. The meditation, I'm good because I got the music and everything. The yoga, I feel like I'm stretching and everything's good. Now the exercise. So sometimes I procrastinate doing that, my routine, because I know the exercise is a component of it. Now, if I found an exercise that I enjoy doing that was more preferable to me, then I wouldn't procrastinate. I would be engaged to do it. So the inability or executive functioning challenges will lead to cause procrastination because it's something that's not preferred. My remedy for that is whatever the activity or the thing that's not preferred, pairing it with the preferred activity. A child wants to watch TV, but it's time for dinner. You don't say, no, you can't watch TV, you have to eat dinner. You use first then language. First dinner, then TV. I said the same thing, but I didn't put any negatives in it. First dinner, then TV. Versus, no, you can't watch TV because you have to eat dinner. The only thing that child hears is, they heard, you can't watch TV. But if I say, first dinner, then TV, I'm pairing a non-preferred activity with a preferred activity. And so a lot of times that will reduce procrastination. Because in their mind, let's go ahead and get through dinner so I can get to where I'm running. Let's watch TV. But if I don't pair it with a preferred activity, and it's just dinner, I want to eat dinner. I'm not hungry. But now it becomes a means to me. I want to watch TV, but I have to eat dinner first. Any other questions? So the next part of the conversation will be social and emotional deficits. So, and a lot of the characteristics, the learning disabilities, the learning challenges that I mentioned today, so go hand in hand with the social and emotional deficits. I'm also going to have just an open forum where you can just ask me anything about education. education, special education, learning disabilities, whatever. I'm gonna give you an opportunity to submit questions in advance, but if you don't, it's fine. There's very little in my 20 years that I haven't encountered about special education. And so this is an opportunity just to share things that may be out of topics.
And if the children have this some problem, what kind of the resources CMIS and conference support?
To support the learning challenge.
Just in case some students have one of the problem.
Okay.
So what the resources our school has?
So what we have here at CMIS, first, if we have a diagnosis, say ADHD, autism, whatever the disorder is, the next thing we do is we take data to see how it impacts his or her learning in the classroom. And if we see that it negatively impacts, then we call a meeting with the families, and we create a 504. So 504, you have two documents that will address any type of disorder or disability. You have an IEP, which is an individualized education program. That's more involved. We're not an IEP school yet. We're building capacity for that. But students who present with an IEP, we manage it. The other is a 504. And it's from the section 504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So one is Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, IDEA, and the other one is Americans with Disabilities Act 504. We do more 504 because what the 504 does is it accommodates students. So I have a student who's hyperactive and can't engage. So part of accommodation is going to be when they take new assignments or tests, they get extended time. Or they're distracted in a large group format when they do assignments or take tests. So one of their accommodations is they come to the SST office and they take their tests and do assignments there in a quiet room. So those are accommodations, those are how we do. We also have two interventionists that go in and do push in and pull out. And what that basically means is they go in and they support the students in the classroom. So if student needs problems staying engaged or has problems with directions, if the teacher is giving directions, they need someone to basically re-emphasize and reiterate what the teacher has given. That's what the intervention is. And so those are good for 1 year. The accommodations are good for testing and assignments. They're not only good for testing, in-class testing and assignments, but standardized testing as well. So MAP testing, SAT, so a 504 will accommodate a student even when they're taking college board exams and even when they get into college. IEPs and 504s are only good until IEPs until age 22, because that's typically when a child has matriculated through the learning process and graduated from college. And so those are the things that we do here to support students with disabilities or with disorders, with 504s. IEPs, you need a multidisciplinary team that's composed of a psychologist, speech and language therapist, occupational therapist, in some cases a nurse, and then evaluation from a doctor. Then we do an educational evaluation to create an IEP. Because we don't have the staff to do that, we basically do 504s now to support those students. Thank you so much for coming out.